Well, UPS delivered better than expected earnings yesterday, raising its full-year forecast as it posted an 80% gain in quarterly profit. The company's CEO, Scott Davis, is with us now, and great for you to stop by our studio.
Great to be here, Betty.
Okay, so Scott, before we get into the business and what you're seeing through your business, I want to talk to you first about trade.
Okay.
We're here talking about the G20, or over in South Korea talking about the G20, and all this fears about protectionism. Now, I know you're on the President's Export Council, so obviously I know your position, particularly through your business. What do you hope does not happen from this G20 meeting?
Well, I think that we cannot get ourselves into any semblance of a trade war right now. I'm a firm believer that growing global trade is the best antidote for the financial crisis we've been through the last few years.
Creating jobs, you mean?
Creating jobs, creating wealth around the world. But even in the U.S., people think that it takes away jobs. It's a jobs creator.
Right, but you and I, when we were talking last December, we had also talked about trade wars and protectionism.
Right.
And it almost seems that since that time, we've actually inched a bit closer to that, though.
I think some in the U.S. is political. It's midterm election time. Mm-hmm. It's typical that congressmen go back to the home constituents and talk about job protection. I think the administration understands the value of trade. They've said they want to double U.S. exports in the next 5 years. That's not going to happen unless we have open trade policies. You
don't think that's going to happen?
Not unless we open trade policies. We need to get the free trade agreements going.
Right, we haven't gotten those going, and that's been one criticism of the White House, is they have not gotten those free trade agreements going that they had promised, that President Obama had promised.
I think the President is dedicated to getting the South Korean agreement going. He's talked about having that in November. I think we have to get past the midterm elections, but I'm convinced the administration wants to get that agreement done.
Scott, for you, and I know that that you've seen China, you've seen India as big drivers of growth for UPS. How much more difficult does it make it for you when there's criticism, there's all this talk about China here and backlash from the lawmakers? How much more difficult does that make it for you to operate in China and to tell the Chinese, look, let us come in and become a domestic shipper?
I think it's a challenge. I think the Chinese government appreciates what UPS has done. We're very important to their economy as far as importing and exporting. We helped do the logistics for the Olympics for Beijing.
Right.
So have good relationships. At the same time, there is some pressure as UPS goes in to compete domestically in China. Mm-hmm. They'll look at how the U.S. is acting. But
have you felt any more hostility than you did a year ago, or no? Has it been the same?
I don't think so. I think the relationship's the same. I think that there's a lot of rhetoric going on right now. I think both countries understand that they need each other to survive and to grow in the future. Okay.
Economic growth. I know that you've always said that you don't see a double dip here in the U.S. It doesn't look likely. China, though, slowing down, how's that going to affect world economy?
China's slowing down. It goes from 10 or 11% to 9 to 10%. I don't think it's going to have a dramatic impact in the overall global economy. Overall, the economy in the U.S. is still cranking along at about a 2 to 3% level. I don't see that changing until we get U.S. exports going. I think the one thing that's going to get us off of that 2 to 3% GDP growth level is doubling the exports over the next 5 years.
Doubling the exports, which is going to call for a lower dollar.
A lower dollar will help, but more free trade agreements will help also.
We're back now with the UPS CEO, Scott Davis, and I want to turn things domestic now, Scott. And of course, we're just only a few months away from the holiday shipping season. How is it going to shape up this time around?
Betty, our customers I would say, are cautiously optimistic. We've surveyed a lot of them. I would say they're in the 2 to 3% level for retail sales, which
is that the same as last year?
Yeah, no, it's actually better than last year. I was going to say 2 to 3% doesn't sound great, but last year we were flat. The year before that we were minus 4%. So frankly, it feels pretty good compared to what we've seen the last 2 years.
Yeah, a little bit better, which is always an improvement, which is what you expected.
That's right.
The last time you mentioned to me that high-end retailers were really the ones that you saw facing kind of the bigger challenges. Is that still the case now?
I think not as much as it was a year ago. I think that since there has been a recovery, not robust, but a recovery, I think that the high end is looking for a better Christmas season than they did in the past. But again, I think you're going to see strong electronic sales. You're going to see a lot of iPads, a lot of book readers, electronic book readers.
And that's what I wanted to ask you. Are you able to quantify, break out how much the smartphone boom, how much iPads have actually added onto your shipping volume?
Well, it is clear from our China export volume. We know it grew over 50% volume out of China last quarter. We've been doing that quarter after quarter. So clearly, that's coming from demand in the U.S.
Right.
And that's really what drove the air freight shipping demand last year, was really the demand for technology in the United States.
Okay, but you're not able to say, it's this much more, or to put it down to a number.
No, I mean, in general terms, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we're going to ship 430 million packages.
Okay. And
last year we shipped the 2 peak days, 24 million packages. That's like 275 packages a second.
Okay. So basically, bottom line, you want Apple jobs, you want Steve Jobs to keep innovating. Essentially, that's good for business.
Absolutely, new products is good for UPS.
Okay. So moving on from that, though, what are your small business clients telling you right now?
I think the small business clients are still apprehensive. I think that they're afraid to add new employees. They're still a little bit uncertain about some policies going forward. And as we talked about earlier, things like capital gains. These people build businesses over 30 or 40 years, and to not know what the capital gains rate is going to be going forward. Is it going to be 15%? Is it going to be 20%? Or is it going to be 30% going forward? It has a big impact on people as they build businesses. Is that what they're telling you is the reason why they're not hiring? I'd say it's a combination of uncertainty in policy, and still the credit situation has been a challenge for them. Bank credit's getting a little bit better. I think through the crisis and through the new regulations banks had to face, and reserve requirements, that there was limited borrowing available. It's getting better, but that's still an issue out there for small business. And Scott, you stepped down from your term as the chairman of the Atlanta Fed. I did. And so now that you're sort of out of the Fed, out of the operations of the Fed, or chairing the Atlanta Fed, as a business, as somebody who runs a major Fortune 500 company, are you happy with what the Fed has done in terms of with the unemployment picture, but also with this idea that we have that the Fed is going to continue to print money, essentially? I think the Fed and Chairman Bernanke had made all the right moves over the last several years. It haven't been easy decisions, and decisions that have never made in the past. But I think they've done a good job with this. Whether QE2 will work or not. They've done a good job. That's the operative word. What about doing a good job going forward? Well, I think they're doing a good job so far. I think they need some help out of Congress. We need to get some of these laws and some more certainty out there in policy. But I think so far I'd support what they're doing. Okay. All right, Scott, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Eddie, it's great being here as always.